here when we start this this note, which is really the end of the first one. Don't write down this first stuff. Actually, write down why are we made. No. Hold on here. Here's what you're going to write. You're going to write down, why do cells divide? All right, and that's what they do. That's what you can put as the title. Why do cells divide? You then can write this bullet right here. Cell division allows for organisms to grow, repair, and reproduce. And we're going to then write a little bit about each of those. What are you in need of there, Mitchell? What are you looking for? Pencil? Do you not have one? Did you find one? No? I don't have a good eraser on that, so don't make any mistakes. Are we good to go? For growth. For growth. Cells divide to produce new small cells rather than grow too large. Yep. This is all good information. The next two bullets are why we did yesterday's lab. Small cells use diffusion and osmosis more efficiently than large cells. Remember in yesterday's lab, those big cells, that purple hardly worked its way to the interior of the cell. If you had important structures of the cell located in the center, that's where the nucleus tends to be, then that nucleus is not going to get the nutrients it needs, maybe even the mitochondria. Remember, that's the powerhouse. It's going to need the oxygen in order to generate that energy. All those chemicals that are needed, if the cell is too large, cannot make it to the interior. The cell would die. It would starve to death. The opposite is true. Any waste that is generated inside the cell can easily be moved to the outside of the cell efficiently, again, if the cell is small. And again, in terms of growth, like a human being, a small baby growing into an adolescent, then ultimately an adult, it's more efficient to just produce more cells in order to have that structure grow, become larger. And I have no idea what that is in the corner of that slide. Some biologist made up this slide for me. It just looks cool. I have no idea what that is. Looks like something from a microscope, probably some kind of aquatic creature. Some tiny little microscopic aquatic creature that floats around or something. I have no idea what that has to do with growth. I would say nothing. Good to go? For reproduction. Now, at this point, I'm going to talk about two types of reproduction. So you can just put reproduction as the title, and then my next slide can go underneath it. Now, at this point, we're just going to briefly talk about types of reproduction. This is where I would prefer to leave these lessons up to the phys ed teachers, not myself. But I'll try to keep it as scientific as possible. We won't bring any of that other stuff into it. Yeah, you're going to write that down. So, when it comes to reproduction in the natural world, there are two types. There is something called asexual reproduction. A means without. In other words, reproduction without sexual. This is where I turn a little red. All right. When cells divide, they divide by asexual reproduction. It means the parent cell simply splits into two, and the daughter cells, that they call them, are identical to the parent. It just splits apart. Something within that cell gives the signal it's time to split. The cell splits. Typically, it's when it gets too big. The nucleus gives instructions to split. At one point on The Big Bang Theory, anybody watch The Big Bang Theory? Okay. There's one where Sheldon eats too much at the very end, and then he turns into two of them, right? They're making fun of this, asexual reproduction, right? They're making fun of the fact that Sheldon is an odd guy and doesn't want to have anything to do with Amy, and therefore he's going to reproduce by asexual reproduction. Humans don't work that way as beings, but our cells do, right? Our cells are constantly doing this. So skin cells underneath the layer of cells that are protecting us right now are some of them are splitting. And then the old cells are leaving, they're falling off, and those new cells come to the top. This is the type of reproduction we're going to talk about today. Cells dividing. Each time a single parent divides, two new cells are formed, and they're identical to the previous ones. Their DNA is the same. There's no variation. All right? Do we have that all written down after I went into great lengths? The other type, which we're not going to talk about in this course, is sexual reproduction. You don't have a question, Max, do you? Oh, good. His hand went up. I thought there was going to be an awkward question here. Sexual reproduction, obviously, from, what you've learned in phys ed. You need two parents. You need special sex cells. They've got to get together. You guys know what. You guys learn it in phys ed. In terms of the genetic information about that, which is the science stuff, which is what I'm going to talk about, each of those sex cells brings its own genetic information. All right? When those two cells get together and the egg has been germinated and you get the zygote and all that type of stuff, that new cell that's been created now has genetic information from both parents, and you get genetic variation amongst the population. You look a little different than your parents, but you've got characteristics of each. All right? So there's the two types of reproduction, and we're going to be talking essentially about the asexual reproduction of the cells as they split. If you were to take college-level biology, it would go into detail about how the genetic information from the both parents come together and how that results in different traits, and more detail to the genetic discussion of that particular function. All right? But again, that is why cells divide. The process for making two skin cells, which is asexual reproduction, that we're going to learn about, is a little different than the process that goes into making the sperm and the egg cells, because there has to be this division of genetic information. So again, it's a more complicated, different process that is not part of this course that we're not going to worry about. I just want you to know the difference between asexual, one parent, two identical offspring, two identical cells, in this case, two parents, and then the offspring is not identical. It's a genetic combination of the two parents. Okay. Oh, the offspring has a full set of DNA set. Yeah, you do want to write that in. I hate the, oh, look, there's that silly picture coming in. I hate the animations. One more bullet came in there. Sorry about that. The offspring has a full set of DNA in the end. So make sure you add that to the bottom. Some of us are using devices. I'm not sure where we're at. Am I good to go? Josh is writing and leaning. Got it? Good to go? And for repair. And I'm not sure what I'm going to write here. Hold on one second. That was my last side. So for repair, just write down all organisms need to repair/replace cells to stay alive. That's all I need you to write. I don't necessarily need you to write the fact that millions of skin cells each day, blood cells every 120 days, scrapes, cuts, broken bones, etc. Don't write that down. It's obvious that whenever something happens to some cells in your body due to some kind of traumatic situation, those cells may die. But in the end, it's just a few cells dying, and therefore they can be repaired. Yep.
Well, like repair issues and stuff like that. What about like people getting concussion? Like happens where he does every repair itself?
That's a good question. And again, I'm not a biologist, so I don't necessarily have direct knowledge of the answer. But I will give you the information that I do know. I do know that at a certain stage in your life, you don't develop any new brain cells. You know what I'm talking about? They say brain cells. We're typically talking about something called neurons, which are the cells that are in charge of sending electrical signals around the brain, which are basically thoughts and ideas, and then sending that out to our hands and arms and that type of thing. We'll talk about that later on. So when you get a concussion, your brain bumps up against the inside of the skull, right? And it causes a bruise in some way. Now, I don't know whether a concussion causes the death of brain cells, you know what I mean, of nerves. I don't believe it does, or you'd have, well, you do have sometimes memory impairment, but I think that might be more of the body responding to that damage, and then after the repair takes place, right? So the white blood cells come in and help clean up everything, that you might get those thoughts back. But then there's things like amnesia for people that do get hit where they don't get those thoughts back. So I really don't know. You know what I mean? I'm just kind of speculating on your question. There must be some kind of repair going on in there, right? There's some kind of repair process happening, but did you lose a brain cell and do you get that brain cell back? I don't think you can get it back, but I don't know whether you lose it. You know what I mean? Because I really don't know exactly what's happening in there. So I don't have a good answer for you. I apologize. This is unfortunately the extent of my knowledge when it comes to this stuff. All right, but it's a good question. It's a good question. Okay, so at this point we're going to be done this note. So I'm going to stop my recording, and you guys can go to Google Classroom, and I'm going to be there in a second once I stop recording.